They thought you would follow the script, stick to the rhythm, respond like they predicted, because the illusion of control depends on routine behavior, not chaotic intelligence. And you, being the anomaly, decided to take the step they never programmed into the equation. You didn't shout, didn't run, didn't beg. You didn't retaliate in the language they understood. You chose precision over panic, quiet over spectacle. You made the move that shattered the entire illusion because it wasn't written into the plot they rehearsed. That's why their plan broke. Not because you were louder, but because you were utterly unpredictable in your silence. Because you dared to ignore the trap and walk through the side door of your own making. Their control relied on rhythm, push, button dynamics, cause and effect, provocation and reaction. They expected tension to build until your voice cracked, your posture buckled, your mind flinched. That's the formula they banked on. But you didn't play to their tempo. You paused. You pivoted. You responded 3 steps later, or never. And that delay, that refusal to follow the choreography, that's what collapsed the whole operation. Because when someone can't predict your next move, their power falls apart. That's the trap within their trap. They were never playing a real game. They were dancing with a version of you that no longer existed. You saw through the scaffolding of their strategy. You noticed how their words were layered, not for truth, but for psychological leverage. How they created pressure points disguised as concern. How they offered support only when it positioned them above you. They crafted the illusion of choice, wrapped in manipulation. But you smelled it, dissected it. And when you made the move they hadn't accounted for, complete detachment, it short-circuited their psychological wiring. They couldn't bait you anymore. Couldn't lure you into validation loops or guilt-riddled replays. Your stillness broke their loop. They made you the centerpiece of their plot, but forgot you were the author. You changed the story by removing yourself from their page entirely. That move, the refusal to fight for a seat at a poisoned table, turned their strategy inward. They had no enemy to strike, no villain to blame, no saint to pretend to save. They looked around and realized they were now alone with their reflection, and it scared them. Because once the external conflict dissolves, people are left with the war inside. And no matter how much they try to script you back into the drama, your silence is the new storyline. You made a decision to evolve without performing it. No declarations, no updates, no inspirational speeches mid-transformation. You simply changed frequency, and when they tried to tune in, all they heard was static. You became illegible, and when someone loses access to your reactions, your identity becomes myth. That's when fear sets in, because people can't slander what they can't pin down, and people can't manipulate what no longer needs them. Your move wasn't loud, it was surgical. And its brilliance lay in the fact that it required no permission. You didn't ask if it was allowed. You didn't seek applause. You just did it. And by doing so, you invalidated every playbook they had. They prepared for force. You answered with absence. They braced for an argument. You replied with indifference. They armed themselves for chaos. You handed them stillness. That inversion, that was the detonator. Because when you don't match energy, when you don't rise to the conflict, the whole structure collapses. Their entire plan hinged on you playing your part. They didn't build a backup strategy for grace, for clarity, for someone who learned to disarm a bomb by walking away before it ticked. And so it blew up, not on you, but inside them. Because their obsession required your participation, and your peace denied them that power. It's a dangerous thing to remove your presence from places that fed on your pain. They will call it betrayal. They will call it ego. But what they won't say is this: they were feeding on the version of you that kept bleeding to keep others comfortable. You didn't destroy their plan out of vengeance. You simply stopped being the fuel. You stopped answering questions that were designed to confuse. You stopped showing up to battles that only existed to deplete you. Your move wasn't explosive, it was surgical, deliberate, psychological, and above all, it was final. You became invisible on purpose. Not out of fear, but design. You pulled your energy inward like a weapon being sheathed, not because you were finished, but because you were shifting dimensions. They kept knocking on the same door, hoping the old version of you would answer. But that door had vanished. and the entire structure around it had burned down with your silence. That's what a real power move looks like. Not thunder, but absence. Not aggression, but departure. They weren't ready for a war they couldn't see. And when you vanished from their chessboard, they realized you had never been a pawn. You were the architect. They called you unpredictable, cold, detached. But that's because your stillness unnerved them. It confronted the lack of substance in their chaos. They planned for emotions, for tears, for loud exits and broken pieces they could reframe into proof. What they got was a blank page, a disappearing act so clean it left no fingerprints. They replayed every moment, trying to find the cue they missed, the second you changed. But there was no cue. Because power doesn't need a spotlight, it needs discipline. And you delivered it in silence. The most dangerous move is the one that reveals how unnecessary the whole game was. You didn't just break their plan. You exposed it for what it always was, an illusion crafted by insecure minds trying to script a storm in someone else's calm. You didn't fight them. You just became someone so far outside the battlefield that their war started to look ridiculous. That's the paradox of transformation. It makes everything before it look like fiction. And you, standing there with no armor, no rage, no performance, just presence. That was the twist they never saw coming. That was the move that shattered their entire plan.